And then I'll go over the labs you'll do, a couple of labs for the afternoon, and that'll be it for the day. So this winds up to be chapter 7 in your book. So, after talking about CPGs and volumes, all good, but we're going to have to add hosts and export volumes to hosts and unexport them and a couple of other things in this chapter to go over. So here are the objectives. We're going to show you how to add a host, how to prepare a host to access the storage of a 3-part array, how to add the host. You'll do what we refer to as add a fiber channel port, export volumes and unexport volumes from hosts, and you can work with these from SSMC and the CLI, and I'll talk about something called 3-part info as well. So this is again kind of a we're not going to get into a lot of zoning, not really at all. We're not going to get into zoning really at all in this class in detail. But if, let's say down here, you want to add a host. Now remember, the 3-part array eventually, 3-part S creates volumes, allocates the chunklets from the disk, and what we're going to have to do is add a host to export the volumes to. Now normally a host has at least 2 we call FCAs or HBAs in the host for redundancy. All right. In terms of this host, these will have worldwide names. The HBA in the host will have worldwide names, but this host, in terms of the operating system, whether it's Linux, VMware, Windows, whatever, there are some things that are applicable, but eventually you export volumes to worldwide names. But if this is a host, no matter what the operating system of the host here, normally a host is connected to at least a couple of switches here. Like in this example, 2 HBAs in the host, 2 different switches. And from there, this switch over here, what they're calling Fabric A, is connected to a couple of front-end host interfacing ports. The 8 gig fiber channel. This switch over here with the green lines, a couple of fiber channel ports. Now, remember, in your case, in your 7440, first of all, you'll have 4 controller nodes, right? And you'll also use as your front-end ports on the controllers. You have 16 gig fiber channel ports. That 2-port card here in the where the orange is. But whether you have 2 ports, whether you have 2 controllers or 4, use the onboard fiber channel or some of the fiber channel, 16 gig fiber channel ports or 7440. If I want to add this host and eventually export storage to this host, zoning is important. Now, variations of this picture can apply. In other words, more controllers, more paths from the host to the switches. But zoning is important. If I want to add this host and eventually export storage to this host, zoning is important in general. And so what I'm going to go over here is kind of the worldwide naming convention for our ports. These ports here, the onboard, and of course you have a couple of 16 gig fiber channel ports, okay? Now, the most common type of physical connectivity from the host to the array is what's called a fabric attach. Basically mean a couple of, switches between the hosts, all right? Now, so actually, let me flip back here. For zoning purposes here at the switch level, what I'm going to go over next is our ports, meaning the fiber channel ports on the controllers. There's a convention for the worldwide name, and to be able to zone here, it's important for our convention for our worldwide names for the ports. So in terms of the worldwide format of our hosts, our front-end host fiber channel host interfacing ports, I've got a little excerpt here from SSMC, and they're in the systems view. And here's the array in Servo 99. Here's the array serial number. And then I've got an excerpt over here from, they've drilled down in the ports, and they did a little filter here on the front-end host interfacing port. SSMC. And here are the front-end host interfacing ports. Now, just to point this out, you're seeing the NSP, node slot and port number that we went over yesterday on 4 of the host ports. Now, in your 7440, you have 4 controllers, so you'll see 0, 1, 2, and 3 here. And remember, you'll also have, here they assume they're just working with the 2 onboard, here are the 2 onboard fiber channel ports on node 0 and node 1, right? In other words, let me clean up the slide, the 2 onboard ports right here. Okay, but you'll also be using 2 ports here in that optional slot. But in any case, whether you have 2, 4 controllers, you're seeing host ports here. And so they highlight this port here, 011, and they're in the overview area. And you see the worldwide name here. This is the worldwide name of the port. Now here's our convention for the ports. Our worldwide names will always start with a 2, and the next 3 positions are NSP. So you look at this example, this is NSP 011 highlighted in blue. So it's 2011. So it's 2 NSP. And then the next positions in the worldwide name are 002AC. That's an HP3 par standard. Now, the last part of the worldwide name for the ports is, here's what we do. We take the last 5 digits of the array serial number. Now, if you look up here, the last 5 digits of the array serial number here is 11821. Those are the last 5 digits. But in SSMC, the last 5 digits of this serial number, this is the decimal number. So for purposes of the worldwide name, we take this last 5 digits array serial number and decimal, convert it to hex. So 11821 in hex is 002 E2D. So it's the last 5 digits of the array serial number in hex. All right. So recapping this worldwide name, it's always going to start with a 2, NSP 002AC, and the last 5 digits of the array serial number in hex. And that's important to know for zoning purposes, all right? And also, just if you were to log into these switches and do a port show here on this port or this port or this port that are connected to any ports, you can use that convention and really back into the information. Oh, that's the port connected in node 2, slot, port, whatever, slot 2, node, slot, port, even using the serial number of the array. I mean, it's not inconceivable that I might have a couple of 3-par arrays connected to these 2 switches. So this is our convention for the front-end host interfacing. All right. So let's assume you have some hosts connected to some switches connected to a couple, some ports on the fiber channel ports on the nodes. Zoning is done. You're ready to add some hosts and export volumes to hosts. So before I kind of show you some detail on how to work with the hosts, kind of in the GUI and the command line, I have here a little bit of a checklist on some things you should do, kind of, prep work, if you will, before you kind of add the host. Make sure you have supported HBAs. Yesterday in the morning, I mentioned the Spock website that's got a list of, a lot of videos and documentation. Check the Spock website for the supported HBAs in, based on the operating system, Windows, Linux. I know you're predominantly VMware. And what you're going to need to do, if this represents a host, let's say, if you want to add and export some storage to, as I mentioned, each host normally has a couple of host bus adapters. The highlight is we need to get the worldwide names of these HBAs to add the host. Now, the easiest way to do this is to log into the switch here, right, and do a show. But, if, for example, you don't have the access to the switches, or maybe it's a new host you're adding. It's not connected to the switch yet. How do you get the worldwide names? Well, depending on the host operating system, and I'll show you VMware here in a minute, it's pretty easy to do a couple of commands. Somehow, some way you have to get these worldwide names logged in the switch, use some sort of command utility on the host to get the worldwide names of the HBAs. You're going to need that to add the host and export volumes to the host, and every host operating system has a different command or utility. And then you're going to have to work with the multi-pathing solution after you export. And I'll talk a little about from the VMware point of view here in a few minutes. So let's say you're ready to go. Zoning's done, physically connected. We need to get the worldwide names of the HBAs. Now, I'm not going to go, the easiest way is to log into the switch. Now, I have a little bit of an excerpt here from a Brocade switch, what's called the name server area of a Brocade. They're drilling down the ports. Here's a little CLI. I telnet into the switch here for this example, did a show port to get the worldwide name. So the easiest way to get the worldwide names for the host you need to add is to get into the switch. Now, if you can't get into the switch, then it depends on the host operating system. Like, so in VMware, which I know you're predominantly a VMware shop, you can use the web client or the vSphere client to get at the worldwide names. All right. Now, for VMware as well, you can use the ESX CLI command as well, to get the worldwide names. Somehow, some way, you got to get the worldwide names, get at the switch. VMware, you can use this command or the web client or the vSphere client. All right. Now, for other operating systems, Windows, Linux, HPUX, Solaris, AIX, I'm not going to go over each and every operating system because I believe, if I'm not correct, you're predominantly VMware, and used in conjunction with the 3-part array, right? Are you using any other? Are there any OSs I'm leaving out? I remember predominantly VMware. Are there any other OSs I'm missing? Speak up. Well, one I want to show, one I do want to mention. Oh, Ron, question? Yeah, Ron?
Yeah, it's quite possible you'll see, you may see OpenStack running against that.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't have the details on how to get it from the worldwide names from OpenStack. They're gonna,
it's actually a Linux. You just get the way you would do it in OpenStack is just use the Linux operating system level.
Okay.
And get it from there.
Well, yeah. So here's an example of Linux, right? There are a couple ways depending on at the OS level, you can use these commands, right, to get at the worldwide names. Right? This is at the Linux level. The one I want to mention is, and I know I'm jumping around here, the one I do want to mention, and this is just for purposes of the lab, in your lab you're given that you're going to do today, you're going to use the same equipment you used yesterday. Remember, you're given a Windows host. So in the lab today, I have you adding your Windows host. All right. And so, in fact, so today you're going to add your Windows host. Now, remember yesterday you were given like that Windows A, B, C, or D host. I technically in the lab environment can give you access to the switch because your Windows host is connected to a couple of switches and then from there to a couple of controllers. But here's the thing. Remember in your setup from yesterday, you and 3 other people were sharing an array. So those Windows hosts, Windows A, B, C, and D, are connected to 2 different, all 4 of the hosts within a lab group are connected to 2 switches. Well, even if I gave you access to the switches, you don't know which your host is plugged into what port on the switch, so you won't be able to use the switch. So what I'm going to have you do in the lab, just to point this out, is on on your Windows host, I have utilities called, actually I have, what is it? I have installed what's called the QConverge utility on your desktop of your Windows host. So just remember this. Your Windows hosts have a couple of QLogic cards in them that you're going to use today. And I have on the desktops what's called the QConverge utility. And the lab walks you through getting the worldwide names. But, you know, I just want to go over this just for purpose of the lab you're going to do today. You have Windows with QLogic, and I have a couple utilities. And of course, in VMware, as I mentioned, which is, you go into the web client, vSphere client, or you can use this command. And with OpenStack, which I'm not an expert on, Ron is saying you can drill down, use some of these Linux commands to get at the worldwide names. But whatever the operating system is, get the worldwide names somehow, some way. Then you're ready to add the hosts and then eventually export storage to them. So, Ron, question, or did another question, or? Okay.
I was just trying to lower my hand.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. All right. Oh, I see. Okay, thanks. All right. So you're ready to go. Add a host. Now, in SSMC, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to be in the host area, create host. Here we see the existing hosts. Now, so it's pretty easy to create a host. I'll come back to some of these other options here in a few minutes. So to create a host, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to give your host a name. Now, you can call it whatever you want. Most people want to give it, you know, the resolved host name. But like here, it's not going to give you, you know, do any resolution or give it a name, the array. Now, probably tomorrow we'll talk about putting hosts in a host set. Now, let's assume this host you're adding here, you're not going to put in a host set, a new or an existing host set. So here the host set is none. And then from there, you know, there's a pull down. There's a little pull down where you choose the operating system, the common operating systems, the supported OSs will show up there. VMware. This example is a VMware ESXi host. Make sure you choose the right operating system, because when I've done this myself in the past, made mistakes, chose the wrong operating system, and eventually when I went to export volumes to the host, or I mean either when I exported volumes to the host, they didn't my host didn't see the volumes, or I got very strange output like in IO scan output and Windows Disk Manager. Make sure you choose the right operating system. Now, what happens when you choose the operating system here, it sets what's called the persona number. Now, each operating system has what's called its own persona. Like here's the default persona number for VMware host. And this sets certain characteristics for the volume your host, because remember this, you could have multiple hosts. You could have multiple hosts, different operating systems sharing the same fiber channel port, reading and writing volumes via the same front-end fiber channel port. And this allows us to set certain characteristics for the host you're adding. It allows fiber channel ports to be used by multiple hosts with different operating systems. But note here, this option, this is what we call a view only option, a visible only option. I mean, this is set based on whatever you choose for the operating system. So, you know, when you add a host, you give it a name, you choose an OS, and then there's a little option here, add FC. And then when you click on that button, it'll show you a list of all worldwide names that are not a member of an existing host. So in this example, this host has two HBAs, the worldwide names end in D4 and D6, so they're adding both. Two HBAs in the host. Now, so in this list here of worldwide names, it'll show you worldwide names that are zoned to the array that are candidates to be worldwide names for this host you're adding. And a worldwide name can be only a member of one host. All right. So it's pretty easy here. Take the worldwide names, click on add, or you can, add plus here. You can, if you click on new worldwide name here, type out the worldwide name here manually, or worldwide names manually. Now let's talk about this. Let's say today or next week you go and add the host. You go to this screen, give it a name and operating system. You click on add FC. You go to this list here, and you're looking for a couple of worldwide names. They don't show up in the list. What are some of the, as an admin troubleshooting, what would you go to the, like today, if you go and add the host, you're going to add the host, you go to this little button, you don't see the worldwide names. That's a red flag to me. What are some of the things you might go back and troubleshoot? Or what are some of the things you might think that could be wrong, whereas the worldwide names don't show up in the list? Type the answers out in the chat room. What are some possibilities? Go to add the host, the worldwide names don't show up there in the list. Clearly we have a problem. How would you troubleshoot that? What would you think might be the problem? Anybody? Well, major one is zoning. It's not right. Zoning is screwed up. Zoning, right? A good one. Unsupported HBA is a possibility, but probably zoning. I might check the zoning. I make sure I have supported HBA, updated drivers. I mean, as I mentioned before, a worldwide name can only be a member of one host. So like if you added a host in the past and you use the worldwide name you're looking for now, it won't show up in the list. I mean, it could be hardware. I mean, HBA's failing a host. I mean, maybe, the host is down. Maybe the HBA is failed. Need to replace it, but probably let's assume everything's good. It shows up in the list here you just added. Now you can also work with iSCSI here when you add an iSCSI host, but you're not working with iSCSI. So here when you add a host, pretty straightforward to OS, choose some more names. Now this is what's called the create host screen up at the top. You get what's called the general and paths area. This is at the top of the screen. At the bottom of the screen, this is all informational. You can put location and contacts, etc. This is all informational. We can leave this all blank. Like you can put in the IP address here, but you can put in the wrong IP address. The array doesn't talk IP. So pretty easy to create a host. Now actually, let me flip back here. So let's say you've created a host, you highlight the host. You can edit a host, like in SSMC, you can edit a host, including like adding and removing worldwide names from the list, changing the names, the description. The one thing you can't change on the fly is the operating system, which changes the persona number. You would have to unexport any volumes and then delete the host and re-add it. But most of the things you can edit. You can delete a host, and this is how you're going to export and unexport volumes to hosts. Now, Pure Motion is, I touched on it briefly yesterday. If we get time on Friday, we'll talk about migrating data. If this host here has some volumes exported to it, and you want to migrate the volumes from array A to array B, and from 3-par array to another 3-par array, you can kick off the Pure Motion migration tool at the host level here. But we'll get into hopefully some of that on Friday. But these are some of the more common day-to-day things: export, unexport, delete, and create hosts. And then from there, how do you export volumes to hosts? Well, you can do it a couple of ways. There are a couple of areas in SSMC. In this example, they're in the volumes area, virtual volumes area. But as I just showed you, I'm going to flip back. As I just showed you, you can go into the hosts area and click highlight a host and click on export. Or you can do it in the volumes area, highlight a volume and export. So there are a couple of ways you can launch what are called the export screens or wizards. Depending on how you launched it, here they're in the volumes area. So what they do, let me kind of flip back. I want to do that pretty quickly. Mega menu, they're in volumes. They highlight the volume, one of these volumes. You can highlight more than one volume, but here they highlight one volume called VB August Export. So when you export it, you know, here in this example, this is the volume they chose on the prior screen, VB_August 1. And it's pretty straightforward. You click on this add button. By default, it's going to show you hosts. Tomorrow we'll talk about host sets. If you click on host set here, this radio button, a list of your host sets will show up. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. Here you just click on hosts. You know, you highlight the host. Now you can click on more than one host here if you wanted to, but a better idea would put the 2 hosts or 3 hosts in a host set. Let's here you just say highlight a host. You click on add. And then down at the bottom of the screen, the volume will be exported with a LUN number. Now, the default LUN number, the array will use by default the lowest unused LUN number. So like here in this example, let's assume they take this volume VB August 1, they export it to this host called CM847. They highlight this, they click on add. I'm sorry, they highlight this first. And before they click on export to export it, that it'll by default it'll choose the lowest unused LUN number that's not being used for this host up here. You can override that and give it a different LUN, but then you can export. And this is just a kind of a nice view to show you. There are a couple ways you can to point this out. You know, what I'm next showing you is how to unexport volumes from hosts. And you can do it a couple ways, but here they're in the volumes area. They highlight this volume called VB August 2 and they change the view to export. Now you don't have to change the view to export. There are ways you can unexport volumes from the hosts area of SSMC or even the volumes and even volume sets and host sets area. But here they're showing you from this volume is exported. You can see here they changed the view to exports just to show you that it's exported to this host here. And they're showing you how to unexport it. And then there's a confirmation screen that comes up. It says, are you sure? There's a little check you have to check off that says, I've read this and I'm not sure you want to export it. So you can unexport pretty easily from Management Console. Now, let me show you real quick how to work with hosts and exports from the CLI. To create a host from the command line, it's create host. To add hosts, here they add the first worldwide name, the second worldwide name. Here they do a show host, show me my hosts and the worldwide names. You can remove a host with the remove host command, even if volumes are exported to it, but you'll get prompted. To export from the CLI, it's create VLAN. Here they say create VLAN, the volume Oracle_1 with the LUN number 2 to Windows host C. That's to create VLAN is how you export from the command line. Jumping down here to the bottom to unexport, it's remove VLAN, volume, LUN number, and the host. They'll give you a prompt. Are you sure? Yes, no, or quit. To look at volumes that are exported to hosts, well, here you can do show VLAN minus host, give it a host name. This is the volume. It's showing me all 4 paths. This host has 4 paths to the array, including when you do, here they're doing a show VLAN minus host, the host Windows host C. The volume that is exported to this host is, this is the name of the volume, Oracle_1, to this host called Windows host C. These are the worldwide names of the host, but remember this host has 2 HBAs. HBAs worldwide names end in 8C and 8E. But this host has 2 HBAs and each HBA connected to 2 switches, and then each switch is connected to 2 controllers. So in this example, the host has 4 paths to the array. to read and write to any volumes that are exported to this host called Windows Host C. So when you do a show host here, minus host and give it the host name, you're not only seeing the volumes that are exported to the host, which here we only have one volume called Oracle 1, but you're seeing down the paths, even to the NSP level, the paths from the host to the array, 4 paths in this example. And then once you export volumes, for VMware, just do the go into vSphere client, do a rescan, or the web client. Windows, like just to let you know, because you're going to do this today in your lab, you don't need to reboot, just go into Disk Manager. There are a couple ways in Windows, Disk Manager, Device Manager, you do things from the command line, but you need to do some sort of rescan. Depending on the HBA for, you know, Linux and Unix flavors, if you will. But you know, this is what I like to say. I mean, your appropriate admins should be savvy enough to know whatever command or utility they have to run to do a rescan. You know, like your Linux admin should be smart enough to know whatever command they need to do a rescan. Your Windows admin, your VMware admin. And then from there, you have to work with the multipathing solutions. Now, check SPOC for the appropriate multipathing solutions for the different operating systems. But in general, let me just speak in terms of VMware. For VMware, you know, VMware has, in most operating systems now, have some sort of native multipathing / load balancing solution. But for VMware, generally speaking, we want you to use some sort of round robin policy. And that's actually true of most operating. Do a round robin policy. It used to be with older versions of VMware, I can't remember which version it was. I think it was still it was ESXi 5. The default load balancing policy for VMware was a fixed policy, which meant, you know, used one of the paths, the other 2 or 3 standby. VMware, in one of the more recent versions of ESX, switched the default policy to be a round robin policy, which you generally want to keep for VMware. But okay. I showed you this, create host, backwards here. Now the last thing I want to talk about that's applicable to Bank of America is a nice utility called HP3PAR-Info. This is not required, but it's a nice utility to be aware of. And I know that you are going to be installing on your hosts that have storage exported to it. You're going to be installing on the hosts this utility referred to as HP3PAR-Info. Now, let me just kind of skip around here a little bit. Or actually, let me just kind of jump into this. HP3PAR-Info you can get from the SPOC website. It's free. We have versions of it for these OSs, Red Hat Linux, SUSE Linux, Windows, ESX4 higher, and HPUX. And you can install the appropriate versions, ESX, Windows, Red Hat, et cetera, on your hosts that have storage exported to them. And it's good from a troubleshooting point of view. Let's read up here at the top. It's a command line utility that provides useful information for the volume mapping between the host and the array. So let's assume you install the ESX version, ESX host. What you're going to see, and I'll show you how it works, is it'll basically back in from the host perspective some of the 3PAR information. It's installed on the host. You don't need any login credentials, and then you can use the command line. I'll show you this, and provides London device mapping, and it provides information to easily identify the 3PAR LUNs that are exported to a host. There's no login done in band. Now, the best way to talk about this is really to look at some examples. Now, let me just mention here that the examples I'm going to show you here from the command line are from a Windows host. And you're actually going to play around with this today. I installed the Windows version of HP3 Par Info on a Windows host in these examples I'm going to show you. And installed it. The host had it, the Windows host had some volumes exported them. And then what happens is when you install 3PAR info on the host, Linux, Windows, whatever, there's a little icon you'd click on and basically brings up a window where takes you to the directory where the software is installed, where you can type things from the command line. Now, and then the key command is HP3 par info. I'm going to show you the -I, the -F, and the -D option. So when you do HP3 par info -I, now this is not case sensitive, but they do it HP3 par info -I. Looks like there are 2 volumes, 3PAR volumes exported to this Windows host. So it's showing me the drive. These are the Windows drive numbers. The size of the volume, the target and LUN number, the worldwide name. Now each volume, by the way, virtual volume, whether it's fully provisioned, thin deduped, or whatever, when you create any volume, the volume is assigned a worldwide name. And the worldwide name will always, for the volume, will always start with a 6. When you create a volume, there's no way to really set the worldwide name for the volume, but there's a command called setvv you can use from the command line to change the worldwide name. But normally you don't have to do that. But when you do, assuming you take the defaults or whatever, when you do this command, it's showing you the worldwide name. These may look the same, but they're really not. But you get the worldwide name for the volumes. And then you get the volume name, the version of 3PAR OS, and the serial number of the array. So if you think about it, you might be sitting on this Windows host and say, well, these 2 disks here, drive 1 and drive 2, what are the corresponding volume, virtual volume names on the 3PAR side of things? So this is one option, the -I. You can also use the -F for file. Here they do an HP3 par for -F, and you file, -F for file means give it a device file name. Now this is a Windows device file name here, right? So this is physical drive 2. Just to back it up, they're drilling down into this physical drive 2 here. And you see, just to kind of give you some highlights here, the number, the serial number of the array, the version of the OS, the worldwide name, the name of the volume, the LUN number, the user CPG, the copy space CPG, which we haven't really talked about yet, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. The volume ID, BVID, the provisioning type. Now yours will say thin dedupe volume. Here it's a thinly provisioned volume. This will always say 16K, which is a 16K page size. Now the other thing too that's nice, particularly for thin provision volumes or thin dedupe volumes, when you use the -F option, up here with the size, this is the size of the volume. This is the virtual size, the size you created it, But over here, the user size, this is actually the space that's actually used. So this is nice to know about for your thin and thin dedupe volume. You're seeing the size of the volume, essentially how much is used. Right, so this is the size of the volume they're using almost full here. So this is good for troubleshooting. The other option I want to go over is the -D. D stands for delimiter or detailed. And then you can use HP3 par for -D and give it a delimiter character. You can give it a comma, a quote, space quote for space, tabs, dashes, periods. And what will happen when you do an HP3 param for minus D and then give it a delimiter character, by default, it's going to show you the minus F output for all the volumes exported to your host. So if you look at this example, they do HP3 param for minus D and they give it a comma. Remember, there are two physical drives, so it's, here the drive numbers, the serial number, the array for both volumes, the 3-par OS, the worldwide name, the name of the volume size, etc. Essentially, minus F option for every one that's exported to the host with the delimiter character. Here the delimiter character is, remember, a comma between each field. Now, if you think about it, you would never well, I wouldn't say never, but it wouldn't make sense to do this to the screen. What you could do with this minus D, let's use a Windows example. You could do HP3 par info minus D, give it some sort of delimiter character like a comma or a, and then you could send the output to a file. Call the file whatever you want, right? You could send the output to a file. You wouldn't normally do this to the screen like they do up here. Then you can send the output to a file, play with the delimiter, like bring it into an Excel spreadsheet. So that's HP3 par info. I mean, you don't need this to, export volumes to your host, but from a troubleshooting point of view, from the host perspective, you want to back into some information from the arrays perspective, the volume names, the sizes, the CPGs. It's good to know about from a troubleshooting perspective, or, is it required? No, but it's nice to know about, and it's free. And I know that you guys will be using HP3 par info, or it's going to be installed at least on most of your hosts that are physically connected to the 3-par array. All right. So any questions on really anything we talked about today? Really anything this afternoon or this morning? CPGs, volumes, ThinDdew, hosts, exporting, unexporting, CLI, SSMC. All right. Let's go over the labs you're going to do. You're going to use your same logins, your same hosts you used yesterday. Don't differentiate from that. But there are going to be 2 new labs. Now remember yesterday, I mentioned this yesterday, but some of you in the afternoon were coming back to me and asking me questions, and that's fine. You can ask me questions whenever you want. But I just want to reiterate, in your set of books, you had you have essentially 2 sets of books. One we're going to use on Thursday and Friday. The course number on the books should say HK902, and you really should have 2 lab guides. One says AMSVL lab guide on the cover, and one does not. Use the HK902 AMSVL lab guide. And then you're going to do 2 labs today, a lab for Module 4, which is working with CPGs, and another one, Module 5, on hosts and exports, okay? So let me push out a share here and show you the labs. You really can start in the lab guide on page 95. And so let me pull this up here. And the first part of the lab, you can start on page 95. And the first part of the lab, they have you logging it. This is a lab where you're going to basically work with CPGs and volumes using SSMC. So I have you log into SSMC, and I essentially have you going in and creating some CPGs. Now, a couple of things here. They're going to eventually have you create 3 CPGs. A couple of points here. When you create your CPGs, remember, in the array you're working with in the lab, there are no SSDs. So you wind up creating an FC CPG and eventually a nearline CPG. Now so you're not going to create any SSD CPGs. The second thing in terms of CPGs is if you look at the notes, they'll tell you to create some RAID 5 and RAID 6 CPGs. Well, for the RAID 6 CPGs, remember, you only have 2 drive cages in your array. So when they tell you to create a RAID 1 CPG, they'll tell you, okay, keep the availability option cage. But eventually, watch what I'm highlighting here, they'll eventually have you creating some RAID 5 CPGs. They'll tell you switch the availability option for your RAID 5 and RAID 6 CPGs to availability magazine. Make sure you do now. They walk you through that. So if you read the notes carefully, they'll tell you what to do here. But oftentimes I get people, students will private chat me, and I'm sure nobody will do it here today or tomorrow. But what'll happen is students will chat me and say, well, I'm creating a RAID 5 CPG and it comes up and says, I'm getting an error. What's going on? Well, the problem is you probably aren't setting the CPG up with, the default is cage availability. Remember, for any RAID 5 and 6 CPG created in the lab environment here, because we only have 2 cages with 2, disks in them, you're going to have to flip those to availability magazine. The other thing too to point out, one more thing in terms of the CPGs and also the volumes you'll create. When you create your CPGs, your volumes, use your initials somewhere in the name for your CPGs. Because remember, you're sharing the array, the same array with 3 other students. And when you're in SSMC or the command line, you'll see your CPGs and volumes and theirs, the other students. So that from there, if you use your initials, you can filter like an SSMC. I showed you how to filter yesterday. So I have you create 3 CPGs there. It's pretty straightforward, monitoring the activity. I eventually have you looking at some things. Then I have you creating some volumes in SSMC. They will tell you to create a fully provisioned volume and a thin provisioned volume, a couple of other things. Just read the notes. Now, the one thing, remember, since we don't have any SSDs, won't get the option to create a thin dedupe. Just follow the notes. They have you creating some volumes, eventually doing a count, like volumes greater than 1, and then they have you editing, removing volumes. Don't remove all your volumes. Just edit 1, delete 1, just to see how that. And then here's a little lab working with CPGs and volumes using the command line. Let's read the note. Okay, so the first lab, I'm going to stop the share, is basically the SSMC part goes from 95 to 106. And there's a host CPGs and volumes CLI from page 107 and 108 in your lab guide. And then there's a lab for module 5. Starts on page 109. You're going to have to do page 109 to 110. Let me show you that. So on page 109, it really starts on page 110. What you're going to have to do is they walk you through on your Windows host. They have you drill down into Windows Device Manager to get the to see that you have QLogic cards in your Windows host, just to show you that. Then they walk you through using that QLogic CLI utility to get the worldwide names. I mentioned that earlier. Then they eventually have you basically get your worldwide names for your host. Then you're ready to add the host, and you get to skip. You're not going to add the host in Management Console. So you're going to do up through first couple of pages. Then I have you adding your host in SSMC. You're going to go into SSMC, add your host. Pretty straightforward. Then I have you exporting some of the volumes you created earlier to the host, and then unexporting a few. That's pretty straightforward. Now, then what I have you do in the lab, continue on. At this point, your Windows host should be added and have some volumes export. What they're going to have you do in the lab is go in and rescan. So once you add the volumes exported, they want you to go in like on the Windows side and rescan, just to make sure your host sees the disk. So if you do this right, your host should see some disks your Windows has. Now what they're also going to have you do when you go into Windows Disk Manager to see the volumes, you'll see each disk 4 times. And that's because your host will have 4 paths to the array, 2 HBAs, 2 switches, each switches to 2 different controllers. So in the part of the lab this part of the lab, starting on page 128, they'll have you set up Windows MPIO. Just read the notes. Now, the reason they have you do this is just to make sure to clean it up. So, you know, each disk won't show multiple times when you go into Disk Manager. That's going to require a reboot, right? Once the host comes back up, they have you going and do some rescanning, playing with Windows MPIO load balancing to make sure the policy is set to round robin. Then from the student share, they're going to have you install 3PAR info. And then they're going to have you do a few HP 3PAR info commands. Then they're going to have you, for the couple of volumes that are exported host, going into Windows, formatting them and giving them drive letters. This is just so tomorrow we're going to do a lab on snapshots. So you have to have the volumes formatted. We're going to put some data out on the volumes and, you know, snapshot them and so on. So part of this, the end here, is kind of set up for the next lab tomorrow. And then at the end, I have you do a little lab on hosts. Host, adding a host from the CLI and doing some exports from the command line if you want to do that as well. Now in the lab, for the CLI, I essentially have you create a fake host using fake worldwide names. You don't really have another host to play with in the lab environment. So really I just have you doing some CLI stuff for host, export, so on. So back in the classroom, this lab for module 5, you have to do page 109 through 113 to get your worldwide names for your HBAs. Then to work with host, export, you start on page 121 through 138. This is basically adding your host, exporting, unexporting, MPIO, 3PAR info stuff. And if you want to play around with the command line, host, exporting, that's on page 139. So these are the 2 new labs over here in gray and pink you're going to do this afternoon. All right. Okay. And you're going to use the same logins from yesterday, same host, A, B, C, D, there couple new labs here. So up here, I also have your logins, you know, for Windows, SSMC, the CLI up here in the top right-hand corner of this screen. And just like yesterday, here in a few minutes, I'm just going to take my headset off and sit here. If you have any questions, remember to private chat me. Right click on my name and private chat me. We can go from there. Okay. And remember, if you're done, when you're done for the day, you can exit or go offline. That way I just know who's here and who's not. And remember, the